Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Sort of known that there is an internal self-helper and that it is sort of a human divine bridge or ally that kind of pulls everything to a higher vibration of understanding, and it helps the therapy along. And I feel like that's the kismet that happens when there's a great client therapist fit and they're both willing to go on this journey together. And it's one of just like almost a spiritual allyship. And it really helps fortify the really hard work. But I never lose sight of the fact that the client has gone through all of this by themselves with the help and protection and my understanding of some universal something, that some energy that's been compassionately guiding them along. So who am I as a therapist to come in and sort of either just try to dismantle that or to try to act like I, as the therapist, somehow know better when this client has already experienced this and gone through it. And so it's an incredible pairing and wonderful journey when you have the right kind of fit. And
introducing a powerful new update from the Foojan app. Now with flexible subscription plans to fit your journey monthly, quarterly, or yearly. Our new AI-driven onboarding customizes your path to feeling better, faster, and enjoy a refreshed experience with stunning 3D interactive videos. Update now. Empower your inner voice with Foojan. Download today.
Welcome to the Inner Voice, a Heartfelt Chat podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm an author and a founder of the International Awareness and Integration Institute. So today, I will be talking with Dr. Kristen Viola Harrison. She's a trauma psychologist. She's an author and the founder of Soul-Wise Solutions. For 35 years, she's helped individuals navigate profound psychological and spiritual transitions, including those living with complex post-traumatic stress disorders, dissociative identity disorders, schizophrenia, and near-death experiences. She's the co-author of the book I, Shauna, the story of a homeless intersex women who inspired a community. It's a remarkable true story of Shauna Smith, an intersex woman living with schizophrenia whose life challenges stigmas and who inspires a movement toward dignity, inclusion, and soul-deep healing. Dr. Harrison, whether she is working with clients, writing, or speaking, she brings clarity, hope, and humanity to every conversation. I had an amazing conversation from two psychotherapists together, and really looking at the differences between psychosis, some of the mental illness, and then drug-induced psychosis, the experience of dissociative experiences. She really shared a lot about the movement that she has experienced through our field of psychology and the media and what we've gone through, but also her heartfelt experience of the journey that she also went with Shauna. And she really brings that, lands it in that book, and really talking about resilience of how people go through so much. And we can learn so much from people who not only have had mental illnesses, who've had conditions, who've had the trauma, and how each and every one of them, with a little bit of love and support, flourish. And I think it's an amazing message to know and to hear and to learn from. Now, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, my YouTube channel, and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com, or any of my social media platforms, and share your thoughts with me. I really, really love to hear from you. So without further ado, here is Dr. Harrison.
Listen up if you want to promote your personal growth and self-awareness. I found the Foojan app last month and I have been absolutely loving it. I personally have never learned guided meditation, but thanks to this app, I now have learned incredible tools for my own stress relief and emotional self-awareness. Not to mention, there are self-evaluation tools and professional coaching available to utilize however your journey to self-discovery takes you. Join Foojan today and redefine your life one step at a time.
Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory
Written by Dr. Jafari, Dr. Foojan Zeine, and Dr. Manoukian, 3 experts in human development, is your step-by-step guide to raising a healthy child prepared for a culturally integrated world. You're supported in parenting infants to adolescents using the latest evidence-based scientific research on parenting. Order your copy on Amazon now.
It is so nice to have you, Dr. Kristen Viola Harrison. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here.
You have written a book, which the name is Aishan, a story of a homeless intersex woman who inspired a community. So before we kind of get to Sean, and what's inspired you to would want to write this book?
Well, I took about 10 years off to raise kids in there, but I have dedicated my life to trauma studies and being a psychologist and helping people whose voices have fallen in the margins and not really been amplified or heard. Back in the kind of 80s, when I was really first discovering all this, it started with a relationship who turned out to be my first husband, who had a lot of severe trauma, lived on the streets in Bogota before he was adopted by a well-meaning family. And so I kind of was thrust into the world of trauma and trying to understand how it impacts relationships, how it really prevents meaningful flow of life to move forward without its, resolution, or at least addressing the issues. So that kind of started it all. I did have a brother who passed away in my early 20s, sadly from an accident. And so then that also propelled me into listening to the voices of people who had like spiritual encounters, transformations, and near-death experiences. And I was starting to find some eerie similarities between those who had said they were kind of floating above their bodies during trauma and they were being held in a bigger space of spirit, with the people in near-death experiences. And so I really dove into that in my dissertation research to try to understand. And then over the years, it's become really clear that, trauma has so many manifestations, and the field is growing alongside of the awareness with the clients and what they've struggled with. So it's very heartening to have seen the field kind of shift over the years and to kind of flow with it, and also push back against things that just didn't feel very honoring of clients' experiences.
Can you say more about that? How do you see the field shifting?
So in the 80s, first of all, I was out there with people with used to be called multiple personality disorder. And of course, talking to a therapist, I know and I love that you understand all of this. So now it's DID, and dissociation and dissociative conditions have gotten very kind of mainstream now in terms of people understanding. However, back in the day, it was not the case. You were very much putting your professional reputation on the line. And also with a lot of the clients, you were really kind of pushed outside of your own sphere of understanding. And you were kind of making some maybe, judgment errors that you might not have made had somebody not jumped into their world so much with them. But I think one of the keys of a pretty empathic therapist like myself and you as well is that we do jump in there and we really do want to know what their experience is like. And so in that, you often can sort of get a little lost sometimes, but then you find new guideposts that kind of like bring you back out. And then you say, oh, aha, this is what we're working with. And here's how we can help. So one of those little veers was when I was working at a hospital, National Treatment Center in Torrance, California. And it was a great treatment center for dissociative disorders. But that was also during the 80s when all the false memory syndrome people were coming in and backlashing, saying, oh, there's no way that person can be believed because our upstanding family would never do that. And so it was a very confusing time. And then legally, the hospital was a little bit of it, had its hands tied. And then there was insurance and managed care popping in the late 80s that hadn't been the case before. And so everything was very tumultuous, to say the least. But we also, those of us that kept our eyes on the clients and on their stories and on their will to survive, all of the unthinkable things that had happened, we were sort of guided out. We went to a lot of the conferences. We just started spearheading kind of these movements of let's really listen, and maybe let's not be so into verifying the facts per se, but let's go with what their experience is and how can we heal how they feel in their bodies, and what is, that's what led to somatic healing type of modalities. I mean, it's just been an incredible journey to watch the field and watch People try to just learn from each other. And lo and behold, I mean, people are really getting some help now. I see billboards on the streets that I've never seen before about, helping people in crisis from childhood trauma. And I'm like, wow, that used to be so relegated to the, shadows. So it's a very exciting journey. And I will say, I also used to be that annoying person. I'm sure you can relate in a PhD program or PsyD program, where certain professors were like set in their ways and they didn't want to know. And so I would go put articles in their boxes and be like, hey, did you know this research? I think you should bring it up in class. And now, there are courses and whole programs on traumatology. So it's a really wonderful awareness that's been cultivated. And I'm very proud of that with our field.
That's very true. I've had the privilege of working with clients who have had dissociative disorders, and it is one of the most fascinating journeys to be with people as you go through that. And you're absolutely right that the concept of trauma-informed therapies are getting much more prevalent, and their therapists who are starting to learn and really delve into. It's a tough experience for, not obviously for the client as they've gone through it. And actually yesterday we had this conversation where a friend was sitting and saying, why should I go through my trauma? I've actually survived it. I don't need to go. And she said to me, I started, one session with a therapist, and I started crying, and I don't want to go because why should I go through this? And we were talking so much about, this has been, the field is both level, where it is so hard for clients to want to go through rehashing the pain and walking through the pain, because obviously they've coped in so many ways to have survived through it, and having to go through this again, it's so hard. And then having the therapist be in a place where they've worked so much toward themselves and have the ability to contain their own emotions and get through all of these concepts that, go through. It's also its own journey. I remember many years ago, at the beginning of my journey being a therapist, and I'm a very visual person, and I used to, I started like domestic violence shelters and transitional housing. And as people were sharing with me what they've gone through, I would start crying in the session. Yes. And when they left, I would go into the, restroom, and then I would have a purging of everything that I experienced from them in my own body. So yes, the concept of coming back and looking and opening, and therapists getting trained in the trauma and opening the space for people to be able to go. And I was telling my friend, I said, it's almost like having a mold somewhere, and the mold got created, and then you cover it with a lot of paint because you're surviving it. But then you start getting sick and you have no idea why. Yes. Going to the doctors, and people are saying, well, we don't know why. It's in your head. It's in your head. The mold is creeping in your body and destroying you. And although we've survived, somehow, but we survived with sometimes coping mechanisms that are always, some it worked for a while, but it's a detriment to us for the rest of it. So it's so important for us to be able to get healed through these journey. And part of what you've worked with, not only homelessness, trauma, childhood adverse, traumas that people have had, and then also the trauma that people get through having mental illnesses. So not only, for example, someone who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, or someone who has a diagnosis of addiction, or they go through, bipolar depression, any of those, not only they're going through the suffering of the disease, but this also, they also get traumatized by the way that they're dealt with, or they're dealing with their world.
So everything you're saying is just such a beautiful summation of the journey, because to go back to the mold metaphor, but somebody comes in as a remediation person and says, you know what, we got to uncover this. It's not going to be pleasant. Your house is going to be a little ripped up and a little, scaffolded for a while, but you got to trust me that we are in there for your greater benefit, and we will hear you, witness you. We will definitely create a space that feels safe. We will encapsulate it. We will seal it off. And then eventually we'll be able to get you to a place where it's unbelievable how your life will function. And I think that that is the gift of therapy. And of course, everybody resonates differently. And you have to kind of do your work trying to find the therapist, like you would dating somebody, kind of feel out who's the right fit for you. But eventually you want a partner on your journey. You want a team member, so that when you go to the depths, that you know that they have the strength and the grounded, education and heart to be able to be there like you were able to absorb what happened with your trauma clients and then sort of purge it in your own way. And that's why therapists are so encouraged to practice so much self-care, so that we can do that and absorb that. And we have our hazmat suits on. And so we're able to somehow go in there. And then also validating how much it's been strengthening that this person has not only survived it the first time, which by the grace of the universe, they were given the strengths and the capacity to perhaps dissociate or create alters or whatever it is, to get through, and to rely on the fact that that's always there. Nobody's trying to dismantle that whole thing. It's always there if you need it. But what we're trying to do is give everybody a little rest break, like keep them less on alert, because the rest of the system is coming back online the way it could have had the trauma not happened. And then they come in with these huge gifts of survival and the strengths of everything that they've been through. And now I'm sure you're familiar with like Richard Schwartz, like internal family systems was a huge deal when it first came out, and it helped so many clients conceptualize and how to work with parts. But back in the day, there was a lot of pushback about the spiritual aspect. And some of us kept saying at every conference, no, there's, the spiritual aspect, it has to happen, has to be there for making everything else make sense. And I used to work with Dr. Ralph Ellison a lot. He was a mentor on my external reader on my dissertation. We would have long conversations about, he wrote a book on the spiritual side of multiple personality disorder. And he was a little bit excommunicated for a while because people thought, no, we have to get this field to be taken seriously. We have to stay very grounded in the science. And he was like, but no. And so later, now it's just become sort of known that there is an internal self-helper, and that it is sort of a human divine bridge or ally that kind of pulls everything to a higher vibration of understanding, and it helps the therapy along. And I feel like that's the kismet that happens when there's a great client therapist fit and they're both willing to go on this journey together. And it's one of just like almost a spiritual allyship. And it really helps fortify the really hard work. But I never lose sight of the fact that the client has gone through all of this by themselves with the help and protection and my understanding of some universal something, that some energy that's been compassionately guiding them along. So who am I as a therapist to come in and sort of either just try to dismantle that, or to try to act like I, as the therapist, somehow know better when this client has already experienced this and gone through it. And so it's an incredible pairing and wonderful journey when you have the right kind of fit. And as you're talking about like excavating like the mold, it's like, okay, you could maybe live with it always being there, not knowing, kind of half knowing and having symptoms, or you could do something that's a little disruptive at first, or seemingly disruptive, to actually have a much greater access to all of this beautiful life energy. And as Freud says, life energy to be able to live and work and play the way that we want to. And it's like, who wouldn't want that,
Exactly. And I think you're bringing two fields together that, science and spirituality gotten separated from each other. And I think that much more now you're sensing that the science is reaching out and experiencing and science has always tried to explain. So it's trying to explain these experiences because we need tools for explanation in science. So there's so many experiences that people have that because they can't explain it, they'll just say, it's something.
And this is why we love quantum physics, because it's bridging the gap, all the non-locality, all the theories of consciousness. I mean, now we're going, oh, maybe science is able to explain what we always relegated to the spiritual dimension.
But it was always interesting. Also, I worked in inpatient hospitals, and I had two outpatient hospitals, and it was very interesting when I sat with clients who were going through what we call psychosis, or experiences that they had, which other people were not necessarily having the same experience in the room. And there was always a very distinct clarity about which one of the clients that who were still there because the symptomology was there. So they were there, which part of it was connecting and accessing to something bigger than themselves, or it was, for example, drug-induced, neurotransmitters necessarily working together, or there was like a mental illness. And distinct differences, and not that some of it cannot be, integrated together, where there's some of them would have in spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
So this field really seen one of the angles that the spiritual realms have worked when we in therapy also allowed to utilize whatever the experience. We don't even need to name it, but the experience, the supporter, to bring that supporter because the person has chosen, whether it's part of themselves that they've chosen, a figment of their imagination, or is an actual spirit that is helping them. For me, it's like, I don't care as long as it's supportive.
But it's a feel. Like, wouldn't you say that it's a feel that happens in the room, in the consulting room, where you just feel this like preternatural calm, or there's just like some understanding that just clicked and it feels held in a much bigger space. And to me, that's the distinguishing factor, is how I feel, how I use my sort of countertransference, and how I use my, feeling into projective identification and the feelings of what the client can express. And yet somehow we're both feeling something. To me, that's what makes it realer than real. And that's what makes it feel like a real accessing of a spiritual dimension, contrasting with more of like a florid, maybe drug-induced psychosis, or something where it just has, there's a different energy to it, and almost like a more dark energy. There's something less expansive about it, and it's more the brain circuitry sort of going awry, the dopamine flooded, like all of these different things that are happening when someone's having a psychotic reaction. And I think it's also difficult because these days, with legalization of cannabis and THC and whatever, there are a lot of compounds now that are sort of inducing psychotic breaks in people. And there's also a lot of healing components and medicinal properties that I'm not going to take away when people need it for nausea and cancer treatments and whatever. But there is some aspect that is now getting confused in the popular press with like schizophrenia. And then when that produces violence, or that produces something, people are somehow forgetting the fact that, hey, let's look a little more critically. Is this really schizophrenia, or is this a drug-induced psychotic behavior? And that's its own category of something very distinct from pure schizophrenia or mental illness. And that's also very distinct from the spiritual component of another realm and a otherworldly feel.
The experience of the difference that I've experienced has been more that when someone has a connection to the spiritual world, there is a connection. You don't lose connection; you actually expand connection.
Yes,
and with the drug-induced psychosis, or even I've worked with a lot with clients who also had diagnosis of schizophrenia. Actually, my experience in the room is I've never seen more than ever been seen by someone who has a schizophrenia. They see you, they're connected with you. Yes, they might hear voices, and they might, have different things, but it's still very connected to the outside world. What my experience has been, working with the psychosis that is drug-induced, is there's no connection. That world is only internal world, with their own conversations, and there is no connection to the outside world at all. So it's
Yes.
almost like, kind of like losing the synapses in a different way versus connecting the synapses in that way. So it's
Yes.
a very different feel.
Well, that's why I wrote the book Aishana is, I mean, it's multifaceted. I mean, she's intersex, which is sort of what we used to call hermaphrodite, born both. But one of the issues I explore in the book is she is schizophrenic. And so, she lived on the streets for 8 years until we got her off for the last 10. Yay. And, she, her schizophrenia though is I recognize very early on, it's the very rare subtype of what Dr. Colin Ross calls dissociative schizophrenia. So that has some traumatic background and it has a different kind of splitting and it's not as amenable to traditional antipsychotics, which Shauna does not even want to attempt because she has a history of heart disease in her family. She walks a half a marathon a day to try to keep herself healthy mentally, physically, spiritually. And that's her medicine of choice right now. But even with her, I have this feeling like you're describing of like, she's like a walking spirit. Sometimes I feel like there is such a seeing and such a synchronicity. It is just uncanny. Like it's so hard to explain to people how I'll be thinking something and I get a text from Shauna on exactly that esoteric subject. And it's like, to me, that is connected somewhere. And maybe the wiring in the brain is connected to some sort of greater intelligent mind that is sort of like bringing in that kind of de-scrambler for a second. So it's like other things are getting scrambled. Yeah, there's some sort of deep something that's really making a lot of sense. And that could explain a bit of what you're talking about with that really feeling seen. I feel there's an attunement. It's also being lumped now in the category of neurodivergence. And I did raise a stepdaughter with special needs. And so I absolutely believe that their energy is real for them and they're able to read energy and feel energy in an acutely sensitive way that really helps them navigate the life when they can't always count on their rational thought process. And I feel like that needs to have more research behind it. And I think putting it in with a neurodivergence is a completely wholeheartedly the right path to go on because they are at the mercy of their neurodivergence, but they've also come out with a lot of gifts that have been conferred through that. And we need to kind of popularize that aspect in the press as much as all of this link with violence, because that gets me so upset because there's so many different versions of psychosis. And like you're saying, and I'm so heartened to talk to you about this, we have to really try to understand the nuances.
I think obviously the prevalence of drug use everywhere, the easy access to drug use, and it does create a lot of secondary mental illnesses. So yes, the addiction itself is part of the mental condition, but beside the addiction, depending on what drugs are used and how long are used, the dosage that are used, that you are going to have, associate kind of mental illnesses that are going to be there. And and there has been the ones with the drug use have been very much, I've worked with people who hear voices while they're on drugs and, they've stabbed people and they've stabbed their best friends or their mother. And, they've done a lot of things because at that moment is more, it's not the, like schizophrenia as what we've known before, or a lot of the different types of mental illness. So, and I don't know if a lot of people have that access to those diagnoses. I know, like as a family setting, people see their loved ones change, and they change, starting around puberty, and they have no idea what this is, and they're scared. And a lot of times, they go to a psychiatrist, and most psychiatrists cannot. I mean, none of us can really start diagnosing very early because we have to see patterns of what happens. And many times, people are, in order to be functional, they are put on medications, and medications sometimes work and sometimes they don't. And I think our field, it's not still in a place, we don't have all the tools yet to be able to make the right diagnosis very accurately or treat them very accurately. It's still a lot more about trial and error until, the person is in, mid-20s or 30s, and we find patterns and we can do something about it.
Well, and also the psychosocial stressors, like with schizophrenia, as you know, it's such like a biologically driven disease. So there's like a diathesis there. But then you add the stress, usually in college or some sort of setting where all of a sudden there are a lot more psychosocial stressors. And that is often when people have a first schizophrenic break, as you know. But then, you look back and you start to see some patterns of a little bit of disorganization happening earlier. And so it's kind of having that like acute eye, but a lot of times also, it was controversial back in the day when they would call them like EE families, where they were like emotionally expressive was not so good in those families. I can't remember what the designator was. It's changed so many times. But the reality is that they're really saying now it's like certain things just don't have the same impact because it is such a biologically driven disorder. And so you add that to then you add the, chemical dependence on top of mental illness, the dual diagnosis folks, that gets so complicated and difficult. And then you get just the pure chemical dependence with psychotic breaks or psychotic inducing substances. And it's really hard. It's almost like the purity scale is getting so diluted. But if you go back to pure, full on, pure schizophrenia, that's what's so in my heart to kind of like demystify, because that alone, without all these substances added, is not going to act in the way that people often associate or think. And that's the part. And it's the same thing with DID. There's so very few people with DID that actually act on violence. Usually it's a disorder of being hidden in this trauma and finding a way to survive and cope. And so, anything can happen to anybody. And of course, you put any kind of life stressor on that triggers somebody to act. Of course, things can happen. However, your average kind of substance abuse or domestic violence, usually it's not somebody with severe mental illness behind that. And I think that that's so imperative for us to kind of put out there in the popular media to counteract, because they've had so much stigma, and we're really just trying to get people to feel like they can get help. And we want to be able to give a path forward of hope in that help and belonging and feeling accepted and having their dignity back. And that can't happen to keep society safer if we keep putting people more and more in the margins.
Very true. You also shared about the clients who you worked with let's say, death and working with the experience that they had, upon death, let's say, or coming.
Yeah, near-death experiencers.
Yes. I've had similar sharings from clients, which have been really, really fascinating about the process that they go through, and they come back and share. And a lot of them do experience, or they, refer it to in a spiritual experience, which they then bring it and kind of incorporate it as a mission of their life. What are your
Yes. Well, absolutely. And also, they come back so changed. Their lives are fundamentally 180'd. They are just, because part of it is often a life review or a felt sense of sort of what has happened to others as a result of their own behavior, or vice versa. They have just a preternatural understanding then of how we're all one and we all belong to each other, and that we really want to look out for each other and move humanity forward. And it's just this beautiful, it's a reckoning. It's a spiritual wrestling when they first have to kind of come to terms with sometimes their bodies don't function the same if they've had an accident or cardiac arrest, and they have to deal with some physical coping, but they come back in just such a much wider perspective of nothing scares them anymore in the same sense. They're not taking the little moments of life that usually act as disruptors. It's just another part of the picture and the challenge. And I think it's so beautiful, the messages that they of hope and sharing. And I spend a lot of time in therapy with clients kind of reminding them of that this is the eventual trajectory of life. And so how can we take all this trauma? You don't want to spend, if you were traumatized for 15 years as a child, you don't want to spend the next 40 years unpacking that to the point where then you've got 10 years left to actually live in joy. Like, let's go along in this journey and trust that you're being held and you're being cared for, and that everything does make ultimate sense at some point. And so let's just go with that and try to open up a little bit of capacity to fight for that joy again, and to fight for that belonging and sense of just, things are as they should be.
Beautiful. Okay, everyone, get this book. The story of a homeless intersex woman who inspired a community. Share a little bit about how that inspiration has happened in the community.
So, I had realized over a period of time, my ex-husband was a global tennis pro and coached at the majors, and he noticed Sean all the time at the tennis court. And we had just moved to La Jolla, California, and it's a beautiful seaside community. And we thought, okay, chalk that up to maybe you should have a hit with Sean sometime. He looks pretty athletic. And one day we went to the grocery store and Sean was Shauna with a long flowy wig and a bikini top. And we were like, oh, that's interesting. My ex-husband was like, okay, whatever. Let me still just hit tennis balls with him at some point. And I was like, wait, something's going on here. I want to know Shauna's story. Like what is going on? And so there's a Starbucks in the grocery store. I talked to the barista, eventually made a conversation with Shauna, and over time was starting to realize she had schizophrenia because I have those radars as you do. And also was starting to realize that maybe she didn't have a lot of resources. So I started bringing her clothes and whatever. One night I was at the grocery store really late in a downpour, and I realized she had no place to go. It was the first time it clicked for me, like, oh, she's unhoused. And I just was like, this is unacceptable. I put her over in the hotel, and she was so grateful and just like so humble and yet so optimistic and still so spiritually connected. And I was like, this is the right thing to do. So I went back in the parking lot. I started crying my eyes out. I called the editor of the paper. I got really bold and I was like, we need to do something. She can't be outside. Everybody loves her in the community. She's clearly got some struggles. Like, let's help. And long story short, we did a community fundraiser. We got an angel investor. She has now, and then the last few years I've been supporting her. She has now been off the streets for 10 years, and she lived on the streets for 8. And I mean, the amount of teachings that she has to teach. We started the reason we wrote the book was because I was like, Shauna, at some point, if people understood your story a little more fully, maybe we can help you get some sort of productive, way of pulling it forward and also creating some sort of income for yourself. And that was a challenge in and of itself to write this book. It took us 8 years, and I was raising 3 kids and one with special needs. And it was a lot. COVID happened. I had a life-threatening illness in there. A lot happened. But it revealed so much more of the story and so much humanity. And so I just am so proud of Shauna for, coming out of the shadows and saying, hey, this is my story. And this is what we struggle with. This is what we cope with. But at the same time, I just want to teach. And she's been an incredible harbinger of change. And so I taught her, she used to have an Obama flip phone that they gave all the homeless, and she has big fingers and she could barely push the buttons. Now on iPhone, she's in the Shaunaverse. She is like, on social media, she's posted videos through our little team. She's got 1 million views on Instagram, 1 million views on TikTok, because people are just genuinely curious, and how she stays so upbeat despite all of the odds that were stacked against her. And so to me, that's the brilliance of just being able to believe in yourself, feel connected to something bigger, know that you're never alone, and to realize that you never know what's around the corner, and things can turn on a dime in the most positive, life-inspiring way. So that's how I would love people to read this story, because I think you walk away from it just feeling like, wow, she could do all that and go through that, and things changed so wonderfully for her. We went to Europe for 3 weeks to go to all the pride parades and spread her message. She had never left the country. She hadn't been on a plane in 17 years. And it's like, look at her now, So it's
amazing.
Exciting.
The amount of resilience that humans have.
Yes. Exactly.
And when there's a little bit of a love and care, the resilience just, your internal process just shines and focuses you out, and you could help so many people. So thank you for creating that for your heart.
Well, of course. And it's a whole community. It's also the energy you give out, someone's going to notice. Trust that someone will notice and be in resonance with that. And then that creates and amplifies.
Is there anything we haven't shared that you really want people to know?
I love having this conversation with a fellow doctor, and we get how important it is to educate and to resonate with people, and to just offer a place of hope and understanding, and that you're never alone, don't give up, and create those kind of like inroads back to self, but also to something much bigger. And so, there's more of it on our website, www.soulwisesolutions.com. And there's more of Shauna's story. She's friends with the mayor of Palm Springs, who was a trans woman. And she talks about how resilience and joy got Shauna through. And there's just a lot there. And then you can also order the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and through the website.
Dr. Kristen Viola Harrison, everyone, and please go get the book, I, Shauna, the story of the homeless intersex woman who inspired a community. And I think there's so much understanding that needs to be out there, not only for the intersex. I, again, had the privilege of, working through this transition time with so many people that it's heartwarming to see. And it's, people don't understand how much you have to shift every angle of your identity, how you relate with people. I even remember the person I was working with, she changed within a company. And this was a very patriarchal system company. I was actually impressed with the HR and the company by allowing for this to happen. But it was funny because she told me, when I spoke to my coworkers at lunchtime as a male, they treated me a different way than that they treated me as a woman. And not that any of it was bad or wrong. It was just experiencing the difference of how our own identity have to change when this transition happens, and how the identity was something that it was like a struggle inside, and then how you're shifting it and changing it, but how now you have to relate to every single human being out there in the society and your family and everyone from another identity. And I know that this book really opens up and allows the readers to kind of experience the experience of someone who does have, the schizophrenia, who does have to go through these transitions. And instead of staying outside and assuming what looks like that is different, to have the ability to experience the person's experience. And I think as a therapist, we have that privilege of being and hearing and experiencing with them the process that people go through, their growth in their journey in all the ways that they do.
Oh, yes. And you touched on something so vital, too, because when Shauna was Sean homeless, people were much more scared of Sean. She's 6'5", African-American, and very muscular. Yet when she was Shauna homeless, she got so much more support. So there was a survival mechanism built in there, too, to finally allow Shauna to be fully expressive. And now she lives in Palm Springs, very LGBT friendly, and she's housed. And so she wears kind of a mix, an amalgam. She has like a sports bra, cool leggings, men's huge shoes, and then maybe like a baseball cap on her bald head instead of a wig. But it's kind of this cool mix that she's found that directly kind of relates to how she's intersex, and she's lived kind of both. So there's so many fascinating, like adaptive, resilient things that we all tap into. And it was so cool to understand other people's experiences. So to me, there's no room for divisive kind of like rhetoric. It's like, let's just get together, and as therapists, we are sort of naturally attuned to wanting to know another person's experience. But I also feel like we get such a gift all the time by doing so. And so to me, it's like open your mind, and books and films and series are great ways to do that, to try to become a little bit more experienced near to what's going on.
And I think the fear that people have and the society has is because they don't know. Because when something is different, then they're different things. But as you get to know the internal world and you really have an understanding of it, you just get to see the world with all of its different colors, and they're all and it's because we accept that in nature. Nature comes with all different colors. And when it comes
that's beautiful.
Species, it's just like, it can't be in all the different ways, but it is. That's just
that's a beautiful quote. You need to somehow expand that, because that is beautiful. That's a great visual.
So nice to have you. Thank you so
Yes,
much for
thank you
taking
so
the
much
time
for
to be with us.
having me here. Thank you.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.
Are you a psychotherapist looking to enhance your practice? The Awareness Integration Therapy developed by Dr. Foojan Zeine is a comprehensive guide to the principle and techniques of this powerful therapeutic approach. Join the growing community who have elevated their practice and expanded their skills by embracing Awareness Integration Therapy and witnessing its life-changing impact. Order your copy on Amazon now.